Okay, so let's talk muscles of the shoulder girdle. We've got a couple of different pictures here. Remember, the shoulder girdle refers to two bones on each side, your clavicle, collarbone, and then the scapula. On this side of the page, this picture is from your textbook, and it shows a pretty deep view of the chest and the upper shoulder area up into the neck. And you can see like the pec minor, which we could not see on this previous page because the pec minor is covered by the pectoralis major. Okay. On the right side of the image, we've removed the pec minor to show those serratus anterior muscles that look like the serrated knife that I talked about last time. We can also see the levator scapulae here in our anterior view, along with the trapezius, which are visible over here on this side as well. Now, this is an image that shows the back of the body, the upper back, that is. This would be the right side. This would be the left side. So this is a posterior view. This side is superficial, showing you the trapezius, which is a muscle that we have on both sides, actually. A lot of times it's called traps. They give the kind of rounded shoulder appearance, especially to bigger bodybuilding type individuals. Very common for guys to like to have that big rounded shoulder appearance due to their traps. What we've done over here is removed one of those trapezius muscles to show the levator scapulae and the rhomboid muscles. And what would be right here would be the scapula. Now, as far as these images go, I'm not worried about you identifying them because we've got some pictures here on the next couple pages where we can identify them. This is an illustration of the back. Something that is good about this picture is we've removed the trapezius muscles from both sides so that we can see a lot of these muscles in here are associated with the scapula. Unfortunately, I wish they would keep at least one of the two traps so you could see it, which actually, if I go to the next page, I actually really like this image because it does show you one of the trap muscles. But I'll go ahead and go through this image and tell you what to highlight, just like I've been doing, even though it's not my favorite image on the world, or in the world, I should say. So we'll start here with the deltoid muscle. We've seen that in several pictures now. It's that big shoulder muscle there, wraps around the top of our humerus. We can see it both anteriorly and posteriorly. Go ahead and highlight the teres major. Your biggest back muscles are your latissimus dorsi muscles, or lats as we like to typically call them, which we see here on both sides. Over on the right side, we have visible the levator scapulae, although it's been cut away. We only see a portion of it. The rest of it would run up and attach farther up, but the picture's been cut away. Levator scapulae tells you exactly what that muscle is responsible for doing. Levate means to elevate, bring upwards. Scapulae for scapula. Okay, so it pulls our scapula up. It's like when we shrug our shoulders. It's going to be involved with that. The next muscle listed there is the rhomboid minor, which is smaller than the rhomboid major. Those help pull the scapula towards the middle of our back. So like if you wanted to like try to touch your elbows in behind you, which is not possible, but those will be pulling your scapula towards your spine, as you can see. On the next page, we're going to talk about the rotator cuff muscles. We can see 3 out of the 4 here, which includes the supraspinatus, found in the supraspinous fossa of our scapula. Below that is the infraspinatus, found in the infraspinous fossa. So go ahead and highlight that. And then a third rotator cuff muscle is the teres minor, which you'll want to know not to be confused with the much larger teres major, which you'll also want to know. Here, we show it on both sides. Teres major is a lot bigger than the teres minor, just like the rhomboid major is a lot bigger than the rhomboid minor. We also show the 2 out of the 3 heads of the triceps. I want you to know them both. But don't worry about knowing lateral head, long head. There's also another head, but I'm not going to worry about it. Just triceps is what I'll have you guys worry about knowing. And then the very last thing I want you to highlight is this kind of diamond-shaped area down here towards the bottom of our back and the kind of top of our, well, where our butt would be, this connective tissue called the thoracolumbar fascia, which is the investing fascia of the body wall musculature and the dorsal aspect of our trunk. As it states, associated with predominantly this latissimus dorsi muscles, or those, I should say, because they're plural. All right, so let's go on to the rotator cuff, which I've been already mentioning. Fancy term for your rotator cuff is called the musculotendinous cuff. Predominantly known as rotator cuff, though, which is what I'll usually refer to it as. A set of 4 muscles and their tendons. Thinking back to our last unit when we talked about joints and specifically the shoulder joint, we mentioned them. Here we get to see them intact along with their whitely colored here tendons. Now we've got an anterior view and a posterior view. And the anterior view is the only view that you would be able to find the subscapularis. The subscapularis is in the subscapular fossa. It's on the front of the scapula. So this muscle would be between the scapula and the back of your ribs, if you want to kind of think about where that location is. Okay, so we're talking pretty deep in the body here. We can also see the supraspinatus traveling through that little gap right there between the acromion and the coracoid process. So you'll want to know those two. And then over here in the posterior view, which is just like what we showed right here, we see the same 3 that I had you highlight on that page: supraspinatus, infraspinatus, and teres minor. Notice the teres major is not listed. The teres major is not a rotator cuff muscle. It does not wrap around the head of the humerus and hold it in that socket forming the GH joint. The teres major inserts farther down the humerus. We can also see them down here in this illustration, which I really like this one, once again, because you can see the trapezius, at least on one side, here on our superficial left side. We can also see the latissimus dorsi, but then we remove those 2 big muscles because they cover up so many others to see a lot of other stuff. So going through, and we can see all the way up to the head, muscles like the sternocleidomastoid, which I'll want you to highlight. In fact, you can just highlight everything here on the left side. Probably would be a good idea, draw an arrow in here to the triceps. Label that. It's not labeled, but it's very visible, so highlight it, or draw it in, I would say. And then also not labeled, but we saw it on the previous page, right in here in this kind of white silvery area. That's that thoracolumbar fascia that I want you to know as well. Thoraco for thoracic, lumbar for lumbar, because that's where it's found throughout the thoracic and lumbar portions of our back. Okay, so everything on that left side plus the triceps and the thoracolumbar fascia. On the right side, everything from levator scapulae down to teres major would be fair game as well. Now, they have the supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, teres major all labeled here on this right side. They've got some of those shown here and labeled on the left side. To me, it's a lot easier to tell them apart on this side. But, I mean, you can kind of tell them apart individually here. If you see this image on the exam and it's blank and I tell you to label those, my advice would be to label them on this side where it's easier to kind of tell them apart. But, you know, I can't control what you guys choose to do. So that's just my advice. So everything in this image pretty much except for splenius capitis, I'm not going to worry about you knowing. Sound good? Okie doke. All right, let's talk about the erector spinae muscles. Do you have to fill this blank in? Okay. Erector spinae muscles, exactly what it sounds like, are muscles that help keep our spine erect. These are a lot of times really long strap-like muscles, mainly responsible for extending the backbone, so keeping us nice up and down, straight up the spine, but also can affect flexion, so like bending over, lateral flexion, and then rotational movements as well. A lot of these you can see just run right up down the spine, and so what they've done actually, you can see they got these little probes that are separating them from one another, so you can kind of tell them apart. As far as the exam goes, the only thing really that I want you to know is that the erector spinae muscles help with this sense of motions. I'm not going to worry about the pictures because they're really so hard to tell apart, and they're really, very similar looking and similar functioning muscles. I'm not going to worry about you knowing that these are the specific ones that belong to the erector spinae, just what they do, which the name of the muscle tells you exactly, or muscles, I should say, the group of them, I should say. Probably something that, if you go on to chiropractic school, you would have to definitely know, but for most people, not such a big deal. Okay, moving on to muscles that move the humerus. I didn't put anything text-wise in because I've included just two big tables, one showing axial muscles, pec major and latissimus dorsi, which we've seen several times now, and then scapular muscles that move the humerus, which we've seen most of these already as well. This image is pretty much the exact same image as the one that we ended class last time with, the exception being a little bit of differences, show a little bit more of the neck. The rectus sheath is a little bit more see-through. We can kind of see the linea alba a little bit better, the tendinous intersections, some other things as well. So I actually like this image a little bit better than that one. So going through and highlighting, you're going to want to know the platysma, the deltoid, the pectoralis major. Now, here's a key thing. For whatever reason, a lot of times students seem to think this little area of the muscle is not the major. All three parts are the major. You can only find the minor if you completely cut away the pec major, because the pectoralis minor is deep to the pectoralis major. So when you're looking superficially, you will never be able to see the pec major. Okay, only over here where the pec major is completely removed. All right, latissimus dorsi, don't worry about because that's a big back muscle. We can't really see much of it here, but go ahead and highlight the serratus anterior. Or you could draw it in over here where you can, kind of see it a little bit better. Okay, right in here along the side of the armpit is the serratus anterior. Linea alba, remember that's the line that runs down the middle of our rectus abdominis. External oblique is nice and visible, as is the rectus sheath and the superficial inguinal ring that we talked about last time. On the right side of the image where we've cut things away, we'll start at the top with the sternocleidomastoid and trapezius, pectoralis minor. We see the intercostal muscles that we talked about last time. The intercostals, remember, are between our ribs. They're all up here as well. They're labeled internal here, external down here. So highlight those, as well as the internal oblique, transverse abdominis, and rectus abdominis. Might not be a bad idea somewhere along one of these horizontal lines. Remember what we call those? Those are called tendinous intersections. And along with the linea alba, remember those give us that 6 or 8 pack that we've all got, right? All right, moving on to muscles that move the forearm. So not so much associated with the shoulder, but instead moving your elbow, okay, is what we're talking about here. There's 2 major motions that we do at our elbow, flexion, extension, but then we also got supination, pronation when in the forearm, and literally we have muscles that tell you exactly what they do as far as that goes. And we've got a couple different images. This is a lateral view of the upper arm, which I actually like. It's not labeled. It might not be a bad idea to label it. You know, just put lateral view. It's like looking at the side of your arm. We can see the deltoid really nicely. Highlight it, even though it's not an elbow mover. Very visible. Your elbow movers are predominantly associated with the triceps, the biceps, brachialis, which is in between the biceps and the triceps, then the brachioradialis. Now, the brachialis and the brachioradialis could be easily confused. Here's the trick to remember. The brachialis, remember, is only in the brachial region in your upper arm. Okay. If you look at the image down here at the bottom, where we're separating them out, brachioradialis actually is predominantly down in our forearm alongside the radius, which is where the brachioradialis name comes from. I also like this as an anterior view. You might label it as that. Keep your head straight. You can see the 2 heads of the biceps really nicely, how they both attach to the coracoid of our scapula. Triceps is visible, but I wouldn't really worry about, you know, it there. You can see the brachialis a little bit. I would highlight it. The main reason I like this image is because it shows that pronator teres, which can help pull the radius over the top of the ulna, causing us to pronate. There's another pronator muscle. It's down by your wrist, called the pronator quadratus. And then the supinator is visible here. I'm not going to worry about these 4 images. Just these 2. And really, they're not my favorite images on earth, but they do show them pretty well. We've got a set of images here on this page that I'll show you some of those here in a second. Is there anything to write on this page? Okay, so moving down into the forearm. The forearm is one of the more complicated areas of the body as far as muscles go. Same thing can be said for your lower leg, and that's because you've got a lot of long muscles that act on the wrist that are in the forearm. You've got some that act on the elbow. You've also got muscles in your forearms that act on your fingers. And we've actually got 5 different images of the forearm because it's, once again, like lasagna, you've got multiple layers of muscles. The great thing about these images, there's 3 images that you do not need to worry about for this exam. So only the anterior superficial view and the posterior superficial view are images that would be on the exam, if they will show up on the exam. Now, I'm also going to focus on just a few muscles, not nearly as many as what I could. So in the forearm, we're going to focus on what we call the flexor muscles. Specifically, these are going to flex the wrist. Okay, we got 3 flexor muscles: flexor carpi radialis, palmaris longus and flexor carpi ulnaris. And then 3 extensor muscles, those are on the back side of your forearm. Extensor carpi radialis longus, extensor carpi radialis brevis, extensor carpi ulnaris. Notice we're all about the wrist. I'm not going to worry about anything that works your fingers or the hand in your forearm. Okay. I'm also going to talk about and show you 2 bands of connective tissue, a flexor and an extensor retinaculum. So we'll get to that here in this set of images. So once again, we'll just focus on this first image on the left, superficially. Along with those flexor muscles, you can see very nicely a couple others that we talked about on the previous page. So I'm going to have you highlight the pronator teres and the brachioradialis again. The next 3 there listed in a row are the flexor muscles of the wrist, palmaris longus, which is in the middle between the flexor carpi radialis and the flexor carpi ulnaris. Now, if you just follow the muscle and where that tendon ends up, that's going to help you, because if you follow this muscle, for example, that ends up over here by the thumb, remember the forearm bone that's on the thumb side is your radius, so that makes this the radialis. The one that stays on the pinky side is the ulnaris, and then in the middle is the palmaris longus. The other thing that I want you to know is what's called the flexor retinaculum, which looks like a kind of white band-aid right there at your wrist. It's going to help hold those tendons. Look at all those tendons. It's going to help hold them in place. And that's what this band of connective tissue is responsible for doing. The flexor is, and the flexor muscles are on the anterior side of your forearm, whereas on the posterior side is where you'll see the extensors. So on this page, I would like, or on this picture I should say, I want you to highlight the extensor carpi radialis longus, which is really long, hence the name longus. Same thing. Radialis because it's going to go down the thumb side, the radial bone. You've got the extensor carpi ulnaris, which runs more towards the pinky side, where your ulna is. And then you also got the extensor carpi radialis brevis. Remember brevis, I told you guys last time, means short. Now, even though I just said that the flexor carpi ulnaris and the other flexors are anterior, I kind of lied, because your flexor carpi ulnaris, you can see it a lot better in the posterior view. It's that big muscle there that I want you to highlight. So you've got 4 muscles here: extensor carpi radialis longus, extensor carpi ulnaris, extensor carpi radialis brevis, flexor carpi ulnaris, and then also this band of connective tissue, like on the flexor side, the anterior side. Posteriorly, we have what's called the extensor retinaculum. Sound good? All right, let's move into intrinsic muscles of the hand. We have muscles that originate and terminate in the hand, which we can kind of group into 2 major groups: the thenar muscles and the hypothenar muscles. Of the muscles that are listed here, the only ones I'm going to worry about you knowing are the thenar muscles. Thenar are found in the lateral aspect of the hand, and what these work on is your pollex. The pollex is the fancy word to describe your thumb. So these are the ones that help you move your thumb, and I talked about how important our thumb is. Notice they have pollicis in there. All 4 muscles do. Pollicis refers to pollex, your thumb. Okay. And the name of the muscle tells you exactly what it's going to do as far as motion goes. There's an opponens, an abductor, a flexor, okay, and then an adductor as well, which I want you to highlight those four there. I included this image as well as this one because I show you with this picture, when you cut that abductor pollicis, you can see the kind of more deep muscles, opponens, and the flexor. Okay. Here they look like they're real small muscles, but when you cut it away, you can really see that they're pretty good sized muscles. And you get a little bit better view of the abductor, or excuse me, adductor. I'm not going to worry about you knowing this image, just this one though. As far as the other muscles, you can see the hypothenar muscles. These are going to move the other four fingers. And then we've also got intermediate muscles that are found in the middle, like the lumbricoles and that kind of stuff. Like I told you guys last time, a lot of the big numbers of muscles, we talked about how there's like somewhere around 800 muscles in the body. A lot of those muscles are found in the fingers and hands and are just so small. I'm not going to get hung up on you knowing those. So we'll move on to the perineum. So done with the upper body, now moving down to the lower body. Perineum is described as a diamond-shaped area inferior to the pelvic diaphragm, extending from the pubic symphysis. Remember, pubic symphysis is the point between the two hip bones. So that's anteriorly. Your coccyx is your tailbone posteriorly. And then you've got the ischial tuberosities on both sides. So the diamond, this is basically where your genitalia are, and the anus. So you know exactly where I'm referring to. This is a female. This is a male. These form the floor of our pelvic cavity, essentially. You ever heard the term Kegel muscles? This is what we're talking about, or what I'm talking about. There's a couple different layers, superficial and deep, but they assist in urination, ejaculation in men, urination, and compressing the vagina in females. There's a lot of muscles that are all pretty small, and for that reason, I'm just going to move right on, not worry about this set of images. Just know what the perineum is, which is that diamond-shaped area that I was just mentioning. We'll talk more about the perineum when we get to reproduction, so we'll move on from there. All right, into your thigh area, we have a set of muscles. Collectively, we call the iliopsoas or iliopsoas muscles that all share the same tendon. And these are what we like to call hip flexor muscles. Also help rotate the thigh laterally. This is the lower part of your abdomen, and then this will be your hip bone, as you can see the iliac crest. The psoas minor, psoas major, iliacus, really more so the major and the iliacus are visible, as well as the tensor fascia lata. I'm not going to worry about you identifying them in this image, because we have another image that we can see them the exact same. So we'll move on from those to this illustration that shows the hips, but it also shows you your anterior thigh to show your quad muscles. And I think you have to fill in quadriceps femoris, is that right? Is there any other blanks on this page?
Yeah, just at the very bottom.
Okay. I bet it's for the adductors. All right, let's talk about the quads. Quad is a prefix that means four. Seps, we already learned, means head. So it's a set of four muscles that collectively extend your knee. So they allow you to straighten your leg. They also contribute a little bit to hip flexion, but more so they are associated with moving the knee. And they collectively share the same tendon, the quadriceps tendon. So you're gonna have to draw in on the picture, and we'll talk about the patellar tendon as well. So in this image, on the previous page, I mentioned the tensor fascia lata. It's one of my favorite muscles to discuss. Tensor fascia lata is a muscle, as it showed on the previous page, or said on the previous page, flexes and abducts the thigh at the hip joint. So it helps flex the thigh, but also, helps you open your legs. Running down from that, and also our glute muscles, is the iliotibial tract, which is this white band right here. It's kind of hard to really show it, but anybody ever heard of a structure called the IT band before? If you have, now you know what I'm talking about, or what that is. IT is short for iliotibial tract. Basically, it looks like a band down the lateral side of our thigh. Your quad muscles, we can only see three of them instead of the fourth, the vastus intermedius. What you'd have to do is remove the rectus femoris to show it, because it's deep to that one. But we show the other three, rectus, vastus lateralis, and the medialis. And we also show the three muscles that make up collectively the iliopsoas. You'll want to know all those. Put in the entire bracket itself. You can skip the pectineus, but also we show one of the adductor muscles, the adductor longus. Gracilis, which is a muscle that runs down the medial side of our thigh. Your longest muscle in the body is this, kind of always reminds me of a seatbelt coming across your chest. This is your sartorius muscle. You'll want to know that. And I already mentioned these three. I will also want you to draw in an arrow, and you can see where my pointer is right there. Anywhere above the patella in this white area is the quadriceps tendon, or I always just write it as quad tendon. Anywhere below the patella, right where my pointer is, you'll draw in, or want to draw in, the patellar tendon. So quad tendon above, patellar tendon below. I included this image just as another anterior view, which this is, by the way, you might label it. This is an anterior superficial view. This is an anterior deeper view. The only reason I included it because you can see the individual adductor muscles. You can see the gracilis that I mentioned earlier. But I'm not going to worry about this image. Just this one, once again, is the anterior superficial view. Okay, so that's our superficial upper leg. Then we have to move posteriorly, where we can see the three gluteal muscles from the glutes, maximus, minimus, and medius, which are responsible for extending our femur. So extending the thigh, pulling your leg back, like when we walk and run and jump. It's very important. It also helps extend the hip joint or the torso at that hip joint. These are very powerful muscles, which is why you see like a lot of power athletes, sprinters, and jumpers having big butts, and they've got strong glutes. They've also probably got really strong hamstrings, which are three muscles that are going to flex the knee. So they help you kick your knee back. And so flexing the knee. Biceps femoris actually has two heads, which is why it's called the biceps, just like the biceps brachii. Semitendinosus and semimembranosus. Individually, they are shown here, and their attachment sites, both origin and insertion. I'm not going to worry about you knowing there, but I do want you to know this posterior view. So this is looking at the back of your leg all the way up to your butt and into your calf. So going through, you can see some of the muscles that we talked about previously. I'm not going to worry about gracilis, but I do want you to know the adductor magnus, your biggest adductor. Hence the name Magnus. Okay, I'm going to zoom in really quick and talk about the situation with the tendinosis and the membranosis. Notice here with the membranosis, we're labeling two different things, whereas there's only one arrow for the tendinosis. It's not like there's two different muscles for the membranosis. It's just a really wide muscle, and the tendinosis sits on top of it, superficially to it. So it looks like there's two muscles. It's just one muscle, which if I go back up here, you can see how much wider it is than the tendinosis. The tendinosis would be right here covering a good portion of it, but we can see the membranosis on both sides of it. So know both the tendinosis and the membranosis. Starting at the top, the gluteus medius, gluteus maximus. What we can't see is the gluteus minimus. You'd have to take away the maximus. Don't worry about the tensor fascia lata because it's kind of hard to see here in the posterior view, even though it's labeled. But you can definitely see the iliotibial tract really nicely. Remember, that's the IT band that I was mentioning. Don't worry about the vastus lateralis, really aren't showing much of it. And then as far as the biceps goes, I'm not going to worry about long head, short head. If you really wanted to, you could draw an arrow really right in here where the true, majority of the muscle is. Anywhere up in this area is your biceps femoris. I'm also going to have you label this diamond area behind the knee, which is basically just a cavity. No muscles are found there. Label that the popliteal fossa. Remember, your popliteal or popliteal region is the area behind your knee. It's formed from the various tendons of those hamstrings that I just talked about. Go ahead and also highlight the gastrocnemius. Okay, just like what we saw in the forearm, the lower leg, as you can see, is loaded with a lot of long strap-like muscles that can work the ankle, but also do different things with your toes and foot. For that reason, I'm going to kind of simplify it to just a few specific muscles and a few tendon and accessory structures. Nothing to write? Is there something to write? Okay, and just like with the forearm, I'm not going to worry about you knowing every single one of these pictures. I do want you to know these three, which are all superficial. We've got a just straight on anterior view of the front of your leg, lateral view, and then a posterior view. In our anterior superficial and lateral superficial views, we can see the tibialis anterior very nicely. Tibialis anterior is going to run right down your tibia. In fact, if you feel that, tibial crest your shin, just lateral to that, you should be able to feel the tibialis anterior, which is the prime mover of dorsiflexion, meaning it pulls your toes up off the floor. This posterior view and this lateral view is really the best two images to show the gastrocnemius. Gastroc is what I usually call it for short. Your big double-headed calf muscle, very powerful muscle, which is why, like basketball players, a lot of times very big calves along with their big butts. Okay. The gastroc is superficial. It's more powerful than the soleus, which you'll want to highlight here for this image where you can see it's deep to the gastroc. The soleus is more of a postural muscle, whereas the gastroc is more powerful for like jumping. Those collectively form the majority of our calf. Okay. Along with other posterior superficial muscles, the gastroc is connected to our, I should say not creates, but connected to our calcaneus by a structure we've seen before, the calcaneal or Achilles tendon, which you'll want to highlight here and here. So once again, highlight if you did not already, the tibialis anterior here, the gastroc here, and over here. The soleus really more so here than anywhere else. Calcaneal or Achilles tendon here and here. I listed the tibialis posterior because it's an important muscle for inverting your foot, so helping to roll your ankle and your foot towards the middle part of our body. It's also plantar flexor, but you really can't see it unless you cut away a lot of muscles. The gastroc and the soleus actually have to be removed. So it's a really deep muscle, along with many others, and I'm not going to worry about you knowing. So don't worry about identifying it. And that leaves us with one last slide. Ooh, actually, I almost forgot to mention. And that's because for whatever reason, they're not included. But right here where you can see all these tendons coming across the ankle, there's going to be, and I don't know why they don't include it, like in our wrist, these kind of Band-Aid looking like structures, what we call a superior and an inferior extensor retinaculum, just to help hold those tendons in place. I don't know why they're not included in the picture, so you don't have to label them, obviously. So they're not even shown. Now we can move on to the foot. And specifically what we are going to look at is the bottom of your foot and a set of two muscles and a flattened aponeurosis. And what we are going to focus on is just two muscles, a flexor hallucis brevis shown here, which is going to curl your big toe, flex your big toe, hence the name flexor. Your hallux is the fancy way to describe your toe, big toe that is, hallucis for hallux, brevis because it's short. And then the other four toes you can see, they're going to be curled due to the flexor digitorum brevis. So in this image, I'm not going to worry about this image. Know the flexor hallucis brevis and the flexor digitorum brevis. There's a final structure to highlight, the plantar aponeurosis, which as you can see in parentheses says it's been cut. This is a connective tissue that covers essentially the entirety of the bottom of your foot. So it's been removed, otherwise we wouldn't be able to see any of these. And it's what this white connective tissue is here. Anybody ever heard of plantar fasciitis? Plantar fasciitis is where that gets inflamed. It can be very painful. Every time you step, you're going to be putting pressure on it. So if you've ever experienced plantar fasciitis, you know how unpleasant it is. Sound good?
Do you say you want us to highlight that there?
Yes, go ahead and know that for sure.